Hello, computer science students. Welcome back. This video is again talking about inheritance, and we're going to get to the more specific example. The example we have the classes that we have created in our code here, and talk about their relationships, why inheritance is helpful here, and what it does. And so in this first video, I'm going to give an overview about the relationship between the classes, and then we're going to dive into specifics and coding problems. Maybe problems isn't the real answer, but coding concerns, coding things we need to keep in mind when it comes to inheritance and how it works. So we're going to focus on constructors in particular. So for this example, we have a person, Peep, and we create them. We call them Peep. And so Jules Williams with the code 8675309 is our Peep. And then we're going to make a Phoenix card holder, PC, and that's going to be Jones Jordan, and we'll see that he has all the information that a person does plus a little more, and he does a little more. And so let's explain why that is, how it works, and see our first example of inheritance here. So as we talked about in video 1, the person class represents any person that has made direct contact with Elon that needs to be in our system for any reason. Could be an applicant, could be student, could be faculty, could be staff, could be a spouse of a person of record. There's a lot of reasons you may be a person in Elon's system. But at its high level, at the highest level, if we think about the hierarchy that we looked at with object and container and frame and window, at the very top of that hierarchy was object. Well, that is still technically the top of our hierarchy, but more directly here, person is top of these two classes hierarchy. Person is the top. Phoenix card holder is a subclass of person. Person is a superclass of Phoenix card holder. So to start with, what defines that relationship? How do we define that when I make the Phoenix card holder class, it is a subclass or it inherits from the person class? Well, it comes down to a really, really short piece of code. I mentioned that the coding for this, at least for defining inheritance, is not hard. It's just when you create your class, public class Phoenix card holder, you add on the keyword extends, and this defines the inheritance relationship or the is-a relationship. You could think of every Phoenix card holder is-a or extends person. So now we've defined the relationship. A Phoenix card holder is a person. Anywhere we use the person, a person object or take a person object in to do things with, we can now pass in a Phoenix card holder object. That's it. 2 extra words. But the implications and the coding, the fallout, the interesting pieces here are what we have to do as coders to make sure that this relationship is able to be maintained and kept track of. Because if we pass a Phoenix card holder object into a method that uses a person, we need to make sure all the information that we need to call person methods are available. And so that's what we need to do as coders. So we're going to focus in on constructors here. And before I dive into the actual constructor, which has a very unique piece to it that we'll see right here, this super thing, before I dive too deep into that, I'm going to take a second and talk about why this relationship would need to exist. So why would Elon care about this? Why would Elon want a person class and a Phoenix card holder class? Well, like I said, a person is anyone who's made contact. Applicant, staff, faculty, spouse of faculty or spouse of a person of note, and who knows what else. People have a relationship with Elon. Alumni. Well, not everyone who's in that system should have a Phoenix card, right? Our Phoenix card allows us access to buildings. It lets us, tracks our meals for us, and Phoenix cards have their own IDs because sometimes students lose their Phoenix cards and they have to get a new ID, so their old Phoenix card ID doesn't work. And so with a person, we don't want to change their core ID. The ID to the university should not change because that can cause paperwork and headaches. But instead, but your Phoenix ID might, right? Your Phoenix ID is just a tie to your meal plan and your buildings that you can access. And so if you lose your Phoenix card, they need to be able to shut off your old Phoenix ID so no one can use your old one and give you a new one. So there's, Phoenix card holders in person need to be treated differently. And so there should be different cards, but there's definitely a relationship, right? If you hold a Phoenix card, then Elon knows who you are, by definition. And so this relationship is useful. And by making a Phoenix cardholder extend the person class, that means it will have all the information a person has. It will have your person ID, it will have your last name, and it will have your first name, all kind of built in and included by default because we're extending the person class. That means we're inheriting or being able to gain access to all the methods and fields that are in the person class. So now my Phoenix cardholder has an ID and a last name and a first name as a string stored inside of it. Because it extends person, it inherits all that information. In addition, we now have a second ID. This is our Phoenix ID, and something to track how many meals we have. So in reality, Phoenix cardholder has much more than this, but for our little simple version, we're just going to use it as a meal tracker as well. All right, so now let's dive into the constructor. The constructor for a person, let's do that first. The person constructor here, and remember constructors are just the word public and then the name of the class, reads in an ID, a last name, and a first name, and it stores them in the member variables. It uses the this keyword. You can look in Zybooks for a little review on the this keyword if you're not sure. But it stores the ID, the last name, and the first name, and then remember it just has getters and setters and prints. All right, well, when I create a Phoenix card holder, we'll see in its constructor that the first thing it has is its keyword super. This is a brand new keyword. If you have a quick instinct here, you've heard me use the term superclass and subclass in this video series. Person is the superclass to Phoenix cardholder. So when we're in Phoenix cardholder and we see the word super, we'll know that we're referring to our superclass, our person class. And the important part is, when we construct a Phoenix cardholder, we must also construct a person inside of it, right? So a Phoenix cardholder is a person. That means all the information that a person has to be located inside of our Phoenix cardholder. That means our Phoenix cardholder must have a person ID, a person last name, and a person first name as member variables. You can think about, let me do a little drawing here. If you think about an object as a big block of data, then this is what a Phoenix cardholder would look like. It would have a bunch of data. Let me make this a little smaller. A bunch of data inside of it, and it would have this string ID, and it would have an int block meals. And because it is a person or inherits from a person, it's like this is invisible dashed line, and below the dashed line is all the data that a person has to have. And you'll notice there's actually repeat variable names, which is okay. And we'll talk about why and how you can address specific ones. So we have a string ID, we have a string first name, and we have a string for a last name. So if you think about a Phoenix card object, this is the information it has. These three values, ID, first name, last name, all come from the person class. And then kind of above the dash line, if we think about it this way, the ID and the block meals come from the Phoenix class. So this is our Phoenix card ID, our Phoenix card block meals, and then this is our person ID, first name and last name. And this is required because of the relationship. If every Phoenix card holder is a person, then the Phoenix card holder must have all the information the person has, and probably a little more. Okay? So, when I create my Phoenix card holder, I have to also initialize my person ID, my last name, and my first name. And so it's required that I give the information that my person class requires in its constructor. The person class requires an ID, last name, first name. And so the very first line of my subclass, my Phoenix card holder class, must have the word super, meaning I'm filling in the information, the data, passing this information into my superclass's constructor, and then the right data types. So an ID, a first name, and a last name. So our first line here is going to initialize our Phoenix card holder with the ID, the last name, and the first name passed in to the Phoenix cardholder constructor. So we first fulfill our requirement to make sure our Phoenix cardholder is also a person and has all the information a person has. We then read in a Phoenix ID and set this thing's ID, so this .id, the Phoenix cardholder's ID, equal to the Phoenix ID. So when I make a Phoenix cardholder, I'm going to read in a person ID, last name, first name, and a Phoenix card ID. And then we last set the block meals equal to 0. So this is the important distinction when we start talking about inheritance and constructors, is that if you extend a class, you also have to call super and pass in the information that your super class needs to be constructed. That allows us to say that a Phoenix cardholder is a person because it has all the information a person has. So that's constructors. And so that's the end of this video, and we'll dive into the next topic in the next video.